Jimmy Files. Love Bree and Virgil in bad faith, but at one point in the debate, Bree says that TYT, majority report, the DSA, our congressional allies, didn't get behind the force the vote. And it's like, yeah, maybe reflect on that. You know, I will say this. Look, I went into that situation not quite fully appreciating what was going to happen. And, you know, force the vote is in the past. It failed. It didn't just fail. Let me be clear here. It didn't just fail in the sense that the progressives in the Congress weren't it didn't do what Force the Vote wanted to do, which was to force a vote on Medicare for all. If I organize 3 million people to put comments in at the FCC to reverse net neutrality, let's say, just to use an example in the past, and net neutrality isn't reversed, okay, that failed. But I did organize 3 million people to send in comments and achieved like the biggest amount of pressure that the FCC has ever received. In this instance, force the vote failed. And I think, you know, many people subscribe to the notion that, you know, people need to be convinced to support a candidate or to support an endeavor or whatever. And the force the vote people failed miserably at that. And one of the reasons, you know, they failed to convince me was that it was a middling idea. I didn't think the ask was the right ask. And I said nothing about it. And then it failed even more because Jimmy Dore used it as a weapon to create a wedge between people who are looking to the progressives in Congress to make some change and those progressive the lawmakers. And it alienated people. And, you know, I wasn't saying like, I suppose I could have gone on to bat. They said, you're tactic shaming me. Right? Isn't that the thing? Like, if you don't do what I say you do, you're shaming me. But that was not
It was more than that, too. Like, well, I mean, it's also conflating a support for a tactic with support for Medicare for all,
absolutely.
Which is the worst part.
Absolutely. And
I argue I support Medicare for all a lot more than Jimmy, who supported Tulsi Gabbard in the primary, and I supported Bernie Sanders.
I just wasn't going into, I didn't quite realize that this was going to be sort of a debate to justify anything. And the idea that, like, you know, well, you should have made it about PAYGO. Well, it was called Force the Vote. It wasn't called Force the PAYGO.
They weren't talking about PAYGO. You were talking about PAYGO. And, you know, the idea that, like, initially I was just going to sit this out, you know, 1,000 flowers bloom. But there, you know, the exchange was fine. I was, you know, told over and over again that I was, you know, making it about Jimmy Dore, and I was. I mean, that was the reason why. In fact, I don't know that I ever like publicly dissed the force of the vote until, well, I certainly didn't, until Jimmy, you know, started saying that AOC was the reason why we don't have Medicare for all, which is just patently absurd and harmful.
So, I mean, that I agree that I sort of thought what that was going to be a very sort of like ally to ally conversation about like what we can do better next time, rather than a scolding as to why I didn't get on board with something that I had. I mean, I'll be honest with everybody. Bree knew exactly what I was going to say. I had told her, we had gone back and forth on DMs, and I had said, like, you know, because initially I'd invited her on to the show. And she didn't want to come on. I invited her on long time ago. She didn't want to come on.
Couple asks, right? Asks.
Well, I mean, look,
before the Christmas break.
Yeah, and she didn't want to come on. That's fine. And so I went on. I was not really, to be honest with you, expecting what it was, but it was what it was, and that's, you know, I I didn't perceive that. And then, to be honest with you, like following that, the clips that they put out, I just found to be like there was something else going on. It was really just more about validating a position that they had for a tactic that had expired. And I didn't appreciate it. So,
well, you guys are both exhausting lawyers, so it was always going to go that way.
I'm not a lawyer. I mean, she was a corporate litigator. I'm not.
You're like 2/3 of one, right?
1/3.
You're from a tradition of lawyers.
All right, you're lawyer types, I should say. But I just want to make.
I'm not. I went to secondary. Our professors were farmed out from Harvard.
All right. Well, I just want to make one point about the DSA because it was brought up on this list and it's often included alongside media figures like DSA is itself a media figure or organization. But one of these things is not like the others. Okay. DSA is, and this was primarily an argument between media figures about what they should be saying, which already I think is putting the cart before the horse a little bit. But DSA especially, it's not a media figure. You can't just get it to, change its mind by tweeting at it, right? It's a sprawling, decentralized, democratic organization with its own process for making decisions on tactics and on strategy. And if you are concerned with what DSA is doing or not doing, or if, maybe you don't believe us that we actually care about Medicare for all, come to a meeting about it. And you are welcome to participate in the decision-making process just like anybody else.
And the other thing about that is, meanwhile, while we're having a 3-hour debate on a tactic that is already expired, the DSA is amongst one of, I don't know, a dozen groups having a Healthcare Now conference organized by the nurses union. Literally, I think the kickoff was during that thing.
Shills.
And the moment I mentioned that, these are people who have dedicated a good part of their lives to organizing.
But I think tweeting about it is
look, this is the world that we're in, and so we this is the world that we live in, and so fine, we tweet back and forth. But the fact of the matter is that
right. But the point is more just that going after organizations that are dedicating their real time and who have been a part of an organizing effort for multiple years around this as not virtuous enough based on a 2-week campaign that's largely based on tweeting. Maybe some self-reflection there might be in order.
I mean, I don't know. I just think that look, if the bottom line is how do we get health care? I went on to the show with the idea of how are we going to do this? And it didn't turn out that way. And so, I mean, fine. I felt like I walked away from that. I was feeling like, from a purely debate perspective, I felt like, Bree had done a much better job than I did. And I wasn't necessarily anticipating that type of...
I don't think that's true, Sam.
Well, Can I say one quick thing? The idea that you failed, particularly, or this show or this array of podcasts failed... Jimmy Dore touted your tentative support on Rising when he went on and really sparked this thing. He said, even my haters are supporting it now, right? And then it got narrowed. And when he started attacking the work of DSA and journalists, that we started saying, hey, maybe this isn't actually about just getting people to use their leverage. It's about somebody's toxic personality and media branding, because that's what it was.
And I think also it is quite clearly, I think there is a desire amongst some people, I mean, Jimmy at least, to create a third party, and that and they know that they need to convince people that progressives getting elected to into the Democratic Party is a useless thing to pursue. And so they want to start a third party. So it's not a perspective of electoralism is bad or useless, or that we're pursuing another agenda. I think, DSA might have that perspective of our project is not electoral based. It's just
we use electoral tactics, but our overarching project is different. It's socialism.
Right. But if you're starting a third party to, sort of engage in the same exact situation, you're just basically saying we're going to build this from scratch. And if that's what it is, then be explicit about it.
And maybe do it. Maybe to win an election somewhere. If
Well,
you're a party. That's what parties are meant to do, I thought.
Parties are meant to do a lot of different things. And I really encourage everybody to read the position paper that my caucus, DSA Emerge, put out on the ballot line question and the party question and all of these things that we're talking about. But when I hear electoral third party, I immediately look askance at it, as a socialist and as a communist, because elections are really only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what a party should be and what a workers' party should do and what they have done, the ones that were successful in the past throughout history. The party does so many things, and DSA is not the party yet, but you know what? We do some of the things that a party does. So I guess where I'm going with this is that the ballot line question is kind of a red herring. And if we're going to engage in electoral campaigns, which DSA is going to do, it's always had an electoral focus. That's just one of many working groups. But if we're going to do that, I think it makes less sense to expend all the effort that we would need to expend to have this third party ballot line. It makes more sense to run opportunistically and parasitically on the Democratic Party ballot line, not with the long-term goal of realigning the party, because I believe it is structurally resistant to that, but with the goal of building up our power so that someday we will have the ability to break from the Democrats and be a real contender and not a joke like the Green Party.
Right.